Lowell Dayton grew up among cracked sidewalks and boarded-up storefronts on the southern outskirts of Fairfield. His childhood was marked not by balloons and birthday cakes, but by the sounds of police sirens and the steady ticking of an old clock in an empty apartment while his mother worked 2 jobs. Lowell only saw his father in faded photographs. He left when the boy was just 3 years old. The neighborhood where Lowell grew up was simply known as the Pit, a place few ever escaped. The school corridors in South Fairfield resembled a training ground for future prisoners, metal detectors at the entrance, uniformed guards, bars on the windows. Perhaps even then, the system was preparing him for the future he was so desperately trying to avoid. At 14, Lowell started working part-time at a store on the corner owned by old Jemison, the only person in the neighborhood who didn't look at teenagers as potential thieves. There, he learned to count money faster than the cash register and deal with customers of all kinds. It was also there that he first encountered real business, when goods of dubious origin were sometimes resold in the back room. By the age of 18, Lowell already knew the value of money, time, and freedom. He tried to escape the Pit by enrolling in an accounting course at a community college. But the Pit didn't let its children go so easily. Tuition fees, rent, medicine for his mother, who had been diagnosed with diabetes, all this quickly swallowed up his savings and dreams. He met Shalia Birch in a tiny diner called Donna's when he was 22. She was a waitress, slender, with a cascade of dark braids and cognac-colored eyes. Lowell walked in on a damp November evening, soaked to the skin after his old Ford stalled 3 blocks away. "You look like you need something hotter than coffee," she said, placing a steaming cup in front of him. Shalia possessed the rare beauty that makes people freeze in mid-sentence. But it wasn't just her appearance that attracted Lowell. In her eyes, he saw the same hungry dream of a better life, the same fire that burned within him. "Coffee will be fine if you'll keep me company," Lowell replied. And with that, they began a dance that would lead them to the altar of the local Baptist church 8 months later. Shalia had big dreams. She wanted to leave Fairfield, open her own beauty salon, live in a house with a white picket fence, the real American dream, which seemed so far away from their tiny rented apartment with a leaky sink and neighbors who argued every Friday. "We'll get out of here, Lo," she whispered at night, pressing herself against him. "I know we can." And he believed her. He believed her so much that he started looking for quicker ways to get rich. When his high school friend Marcus Wilson offered him an easy job, Lowell knew he should refuse. But he couldn't get Shalia's face out of his mind, looking at pictures in a magazine of spacious houses with kitchens big enough to dance in, as she put it. He agreed. The plan was simple: rob the local pawn shop, Gold Rush. Marcus claimed that the owner, Old Man Richardson, kept cash in his safe that he used for illegal deals, enough to start a new life. "The old man won't even report it," Marcus assured him. "That money doesn't officially exist, you understand?" But everything went wrong from the start. They didn't know that Richardson's son had installed a new alarm system. They didn't know that there would be a customer at the pawn shop that evening. They didn't know that Marcus would lose his nerve and shoot. The bullet only grazed the buyer's shoulder, but that was enough to turn a simple robbery into an armed assault with aggravating circumstances. The police arrived 4 minutes later. Marcus managed to escape through a back door. Lowell didn't. The trial was quick. Despite having no previous convictions, Lowell was sentenced to 8 years. The judge was one of those who believed in tough measures against crime. Before the sentence was handed down, Shalia sat in the courtroom, slumped over as if weighed down by an invisible burden. She didn't cry, just stared straight at Lowell, and in her eyes he saw the question, "How could you do this to us?" The first week at Fairfield Correctional Facility was like diving into ice water, sharp, painful, knocking the air out of your lungs. Lowell had never considered himself weak, but prison demanded a different kind of strength, cold, calculating endurance. Here, you couldn't show fear, you couldn't stand out, you couldn't stay alone for too long. "Stay in the middle," advised Theron Gilchrist, his cellmate, who was serving the 5th of 12 years for drug distribution. "Don't stick your neck out, but don't be a doormat either. Find your place and stick to it." Theron was a tall, wiry man with dreadlocks pulled back into a tight bun and a gaze that seemed to see right through people. He became Lowell's guide to a new world with its unwritten rules and hidden currents. "It's like the ocean here," Theron explained. "There are sharks, there are small fish, there are schools that stick together, but the most important thing to remember is that the most dangerous creatures often wear uniforms." The prison hierarchy turned out to be a complex system. There were groups united by race, there were loners, there were informal leaders, but above it all stood the guards and the administration, people whose word could turn an already difficult life into a living hell. Prison Warden. Waylon Brooks first noticed Lowell in his 3rd month of incarceration. He was a heavy-set man with short-cropped graying hair and eyes the color of muddy water. His suit was always immaculate, and an American flag pin adorned his lapel. "Dayton," he said, stopping at the cell during his rounds. "Interesting case you've got there. First offense and such a long sentence." Lowell said nothing, but Brooks didn't seem to expect an answer. "I've looked over your file. Smart guy, went to college. Too bad you made a stupid choice." He smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "You're married, aren't you?" "Pretty wife, I saw the photo in your file." Something in Brooks's tone made Lowell tense up. The warden noticed his reaction and chuckled quietly. "Relax, Dayton, I'm just getting to know my charges. It's always good to know who you're dealing with." After that meeting, Lowell noticed that people treated him differently. The guards didn't nitpick, and he got slightly larger portions in the mess hall. The privileges were minor but noticeable and dangerous, as Theron explained. "If Brooks takes an interest in you, it's not good," he said one evening as they sat in their cell after lights out. "He doesn't do anything for no reason." "What do you mean?" Lowell asked. Theron shook his head. "Brooks is a spider. He spins a web and waits until you're tangled up enough that you can't get out. I've been here 5 years and I've seen how he works." "And what does he do?" "It depends on what he wants." Theron lowered his voice. "Sometimes it's information about other inmates. Sometimes it's favors. And sometimes—" He fell silent. "What?" Lowell insisted. "Sometimes he likes the inmates' wives," Theron finally said, "especially the ones who have a long time to serve." Lowell laughed, but it sounded forced. "Shalaya isn't like that." "That's what they all say, brother." Theron shrugged. "Just keep your eyes open." The first visit with Shalaya took place a month after her imprisonment. She arrived in a blue dress Lowell had never seen before, with a new hairstyle and earrings he knew they couldn't afford. She looked more beautiful than ever, and for some reason, it hurt. "You look good," he said, trying to smile. "You look terrible," she replied honestly. "You've lost weight, and that uniform—" "I'm getting used to it," Lowell shrugged. "How are you? Where are you living?" "I'm renting a room from Mrs. Jackson. I found a job at Curly Sue's salon, just washing hair for now, but they promised to train me." She spoke quickly, as if afraid she wouldn't have time to tell him everything, about how she had sold their old car, how she had taken their things out of their apartment, how her mother had called and yelled that she had always known Lowell was a good-for-nothing gangster. "I'll wait," she said at the end of the date, looking him in the eyes. 8 years isn't forever. But they both knew that wasn't true. 8 years is forever for a young woman whose dreams have been shattered like a house of cards. She came back 2 weeks later. Something had changed again. New makeup, new perfume that made Lowell's head spin. "Where did you get the money for all this?" he asked, nodding at her new outfit. "I got a bonus," Shalaya replied, not looking him in the eye. "And I'm also working part-time on weekends at the Blue Moon Bar." Lowell knew that bar, not the most respectable place on the outskirts of town, where patrons often got rough with the waitresses. "You don't need to work there," he said. "What do I need, Lo?" A sudden edge appeared in her voice. "Sit around and cry? Count the days until you come back? I have to live somehow." At that moment, Chief Brooks walked past them. He nodded to Lowell and lingered on Shalaya a little longer than he should have. "Mrs. Dayton," he said with a smile, "I hope you're being well looked after. If you have any problems, my office door is always open." "Thank you, sir," Shalaya replied, and Lowell thought her voice had changed, becoming softer, lower. "Please call me Waylon." Brooks said, smiling again and walking away. When he was gone, Shalia turned to Lowell. He seems nice. Don't trust him, Lowell replied sharply. He's not what he seems. Shalia rolled her eyes. You've only been here a month and you're already paranoid. Maybe not everyone around you is trying to hurt you. After that visit, something changed. Shalia began to visit less often, first every 2 weeks, then once a month, explaining that she was busy with work and tired. Each time she looked better, new clothes, jewelry, even her skin seemed to glow. And each time, Lowell felt a growing distance between them. On one of these visits, about 6 months after his imprisonment, he noticed a thin gold bracelet on her wrist. That's pretty, he said, nodding at the jewelry. Expensive? It's a gift, she replied, then quickly added, from the girls at work. It was my birthday, remember? Lowell remembered. He had made her a card out of cardboard, which the guards had carefully checked before passing it on. Shalia hadn't even taken it out of the envelope during their meeting. On the day Shalia left, Lowell noticed that Brooks was personally escorting her to the exit, talking animatedly. She laughed, easily, freely, the way she hadn't laughed with him in a long time. You need to be careful, Theron said that evening. I saw your wife leaving. Brooks has his eye on her. Shut up, Lowell snapped. You don't know anything about her. I know people, Theron replied calmly. And I know Brooks. He knows how to get what he wants. Shalia isn't like that, Lowell repeated, but the confidence was gone from his voice. That night he lay awake for a long time, thinking about his encounter with Shalia. Something in her eyes, in her voice, had changed. She was physically present, but her thoughts were elsewhere. With someone else? Spring slowly turned into summer. Behind the barred windows of the prison, trees were turning green, which Lowell could only see from a distance during his walks in the prison yard. 9 months had passed since his imprisonment. Enough time for a child to be born, but not enough to get used to life in a cage. Shalia now came no more than once a month. Each visit became an event for which Lowell prepared as if for an important exam. He shaved especially carefully, asked Theron to check his robe for stains, and mentally rehearsed the questions he wanted to ask. That day, she came wearing an ivory-colored dress that fit her body like a second skin. Around her neck glistened a thin gold chain with a tiny heart-shaped pendant that Lowell had never seen before. She smelled of new perfume, something expensive and sophisticated, not at all like the floral scent she had always loved. You look different, Lowell said when they sat down at the table in the visiting room. Shalia smiled slightly, touching the pendant involuntarily. I just want to look nice for you, she replied, but something in her tone made Lowell doubt her. New pendant? He nodded toward the jewelry. Yes, she lowered her eyes. A gift from the girls at work. We had a party to celebrate the salon's anniversary. Lowell nodded, but inside he felt a twinge of pain. Curly Sue's was a cheap hair salon on the outskirts of town. Shalia's co-workers were barely making ends meet. Where did they get the money for gold jewelry? The conversation was awkward, punctuated by long pauses. Shalia talked about work, new clients, and a neighbor who had recently gotten a cat. Lowell listened and nodded, noticing how she avoided looking him in the eye, how her fingers fidgeted nervously with the napkin, how she glanced at her watch too often. Are you in a hurry? He finally asked. What? No, she said, startled. It's just, my shift starts in 2 hours. Lowell knew her schedule. She had the day off. I thought you didn't work on Wednesdays, he said, watching her reaction closely. Oh, yes, Shalia stammered. I switched shifts with Tiffany. She has some family business to attend to. Lying had become a part of their relationship, subtle but obvious to both of them. At that moment, Waylon Brooks entered the room. As always, impeccably dressed, with the familiar American flag pin in his lapel, he looked more like a successful businessman than a prison warden. His eyes slid over Shalia with such obvious interest that Lowell clenched his fists under the table. Mrs. Dayton, Brooks nodded with a smile. As always, it's good to see you in our humble establishment. Hello, Mr. Brooks, Shalia replied, and Lowell noticed how her voice changed. It became lower, softer. We've discussed the matter you asked about, Brooks continued, glancing quickly at Lowell. Stop by my office before you leave. I've prepared the papers. Sure, Shalaya nodded. Thanks. When Brooks left, Lowell asked, What papers? Oh, that, she stammered. I asked about the possibility of additional visits. You know, there's a program for family support for prisoners. Lowell had heard of such a program, but he also knew that to participate, you had to apply through a social worker, not directly to the warden. After Shalaya left, Lowell returned to his cell with a heavy heart. Theron, noticing his mood, asked quietly, Is it her perfume again, smelling of expensive trouble? Lowell nodded, collapsing onto his bunk. She lies all the time, about her job, about gifts, about her schedule. And Brooks, have you seen the way he looks at her? Like she's already his. Don't jump to conclusions, Theron warned. Maybe she's just trying to survive while you're here. It's not that simple. But doubt had already taken root in Lowell's heart. It grew with each passing day, fed by the rumors circulating throughout the prison. The prison rumor mill was working overtime. A week after Shalaya's visit, Lowell overheard a conversation between two inmates in the dining hall. Yeah, Rodriguez got extra visits and a private cell, said one. And why is that? Because his wife is now working as Brooks's secretary. I heard Thompson got parole too, even though he still had 2 years left, replied the second. And everyone knows his wife came to Brooks every week with documents. The old goat knows how to use the system, the first one sneered, and not a single complaint has been upheld yet. Who would believe the word of prisoners against that of a respected prison warden? Lowell felt a chill run through him. Could Shalaya? No, he couldn't even say it out loud. The next day, Brooks summoned him to his office. This was unusual. The warden rarely spoke to inmates directly unless it was about serious violations or parole, and Lowell was still a long way from that. Brooks' office looked like the office of a successful corporate lawyer. An oak desk, a leather chair, diplomas and certificates on the walls. On the desk was a photograph of a smiling middle-aged woman and 2 teenage boys. A family man, a good father. The thought made Lowell feel sick. Dayton, Brooks pointed to the chair opposite him. Have a seat. Lowell sat down, trying to keep his face impassive. I've looked over your case, Brooks began, leafing through the folder. You've been an exemplary prisoner. No violations, good reports from the guards. Thank you, sir, Lowell replied mechanically. I have a proposal, Brooks continued, leaning back in his chair. There's a vacancy in the library. The work isn't dusty, and the conditions are better than in the laundry. What do you say? The library was considered one of the best places to work in the prison. Quiet, little supervision, relative freedom of movement. Many inmates waited years for such an opportunity. Why me? Lowell asked bluntly. Many have been waiting for this spot longer than I have. Brooks smiled, and Lowell didn't like that smile. Let's just say I have reasons to believe you'll appreciate this opportunity, and perhaps you'll be grateful. He emphasized the last word, looking Lowell straight in the eye. I appreciate the offer, sir, Lowell said slowly, but I'm used to working in the laundry. I'd prefer to stay there. Brooks froze for a moment, then his face hardened. As you wish, Dayton, but keep in mind that opportunities like this don't come along often. You could make your stay here much more comfortable, and perhaps even shorter. The hint was more than transparent. Thank you for your concern for my comfort, sir, Lowell replied, struggling to remain calm. By the way, your wife recently requested additional visits, Brooks remarked casually. Unfortunately, I was forced to refuse. You understand the rules. Of course, sir, Lowell stood up. May I go? Yes, Brooks waved his hand. By the way, give my regards to Mrs. Dayton, a charming woman. Back in his cell, Lowell told Theron everything. He practically admitted that he's sleeping with her, he said bitterly. And now he's started to take revenge on me for not playing by his rules. Be careful, Theron warned. Brooks can make your life here a living hell. He knows what you know, and that makes him dangerous. In the weeks that followed, Theron's prediction began to come true. Lowell was transferred to the hardest work in the laundry. His cell was searched 2 or 3 times a week, and the guards nitpicked at the slightest infraction. Once, he was even denied lunch, told he was late, even though he had arrived at the mess hall on time. Brooks wants you to snap, Theron said. watching Lowell pace nervously around their cramped cell. Don't give him the satisfaction. But with each passing day, it became harder and harder to hold back, especially after Shalia's visits became even less frequent. In 3 months, she came only twice, both times looking guilty and saying little, mostly about the weather and trivial news. One evening, when he returned from work, Lowell found a folded piece of paper on his bunk. Looking around to make sure no one was watching, he unfolded the note. Your wife comes to Brooks on Mondays and Thursdays, after work. Check for yourself. The handwriting was unfamiliar, and the note was unsigned. Lowell crumpled the paper and hid it in his pocket, feeling his heart pound wildly. What's that? Asked Theron when he returned from dinner. Lowell showed him the note. It could be a trap, Theron said thoughtfully. Brooks could have planted it to provoke you. What if it's true? Lowell objected. If she really... He couldn't finish the sentence. The very idea that Shalia could betray him like that caused him physical pain. Even if it's true, what can you do? Theron asked. You're a prisoner. She's a free woman. Brooks is the warden. What options do you have? Lowell didn't answer, but a decision was forming inside him. He had to find out the truth for himself. He had to see what happened in Brooks's office when Shalia came in to discuss papers. The next day, he approached Jalen, the guard he knew Theron sometimes did business with. I need a job in the administrative wing, Lowell said without preamble. I heard they need cleaners. Jalen, young but with the tired eyes of a man who had seen too much dirt, gave him an appraising look. What do you need it for, Dayton? You've got it made in the laundry. I need it, Lowell insisted. You know Theron. He vouched for me. Jalen paused, then nodded. All right, but if anything goes wrong, I don't know you. Got it? Got it. On Monday, Lowell entered the administrative wing of the prison for the first time. Everything was different here. Clean corridors, office furniture, potted plants. It was like another world, separated from the reality of the prison by an invisible but impenetrable wall. The work was simple: mopping floors, dusting, taking out the trash. Jalen introduced Lowell to the senior guard as the new cleaner, and the guard glanced at him, nodded, and went back to his newspaper. Brooks's office was at the end of the corridor, a large room with an oak door and a sign that read, Chief W. Brooks. Next to it was a small reception area where a secretary worked, a stern, middle-aged woman who gave Lowell a disapproving look as he passed by with a bucket and mop. Lowell tried to work slowly, dragging out the time. It was almost 6 in the evening, the end of the workday. If the note was true, Shalia should be arriving soon. At 6:30, Lowell was still mopping the floor in the hallway when he heard familiar footsteps. His heart skipped a beat. He would have recognized that gait from 1,000. Light but confident steps, the characteristic click of heels. Shalia. He didn't turn around, continuing to methodically move the mop across the floor, his head bowed low. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw her walk past him, in that very same ivory dress with the same heart-shaped pendant. She didn't notice him, too preoccupied with her own thoughts, and headed straight for Brooks' door. Without knocking, she went inside. The door closed behind her with a soft click. Lowell froze, staring at the closed door. Time seemed to stand still. Images flashed through his mind. Shalia on their wedding day, Shalia laughing at his jokes, Shalia promising to love him forever. And now, Shalia entering the office of the man who had power over his life, without knocking, as if she had every right to do so. He had to find out what was going on behind that door. He had to see it with his own eyes, hear it with his own ears. Only then would he be able to believe, or perhaps disprove, his suspicions. With his heart pounding, Lowell put down the bucket and headed for the door. There was no one in the hallway. The secretary had already left, and security guards didn't usually come into this part of the building after hours. Only the surveillance cameras, which Lowell knew from Theron, were aimed at the entrances and exits, but not at the hallway itself, a cost-cutting measure that the administration had come to regret more than once. He approached the door and listened. At first, he heard nothing but the muffled hum of the air conditioner. Then voices reached his ears, Brooks's low, hoarse voice and Shalia's soft, almost purring voice. They were speaking quietly, and Lowell couldn't make out the words. There was a small window next to the door, a narrow strip of glass covered by blinds. One of the slats was slightly bent, forming a gap. Lowell approached cautiously, trying not to make a sound. Pressing himself against the wall, he slowly turned his head and peered through the gap in the blinds. What he saw changed his life forever. Brooks sat back in his large leather chair. Shalia stood before him, no longer wearing her dress, only her underwear and the pendant around her neck. She slowly leaned toward Brooks, wrapping her arms around his neck. Lowell recoiled from the window, feeling nausea rising in his throat. He couldn't see anymore, couldn't hear their voices, their laughter. Reality hit him like a ton of bricks. All this time, all these months, while he was counting the days until their reunion, Shalia had been with another man, with a man who had power over him. With trembling hands, he picked up the bucket and mop, and quickly walked down the hallway toward the exit of the administrative wing. Only one thought was pounding in his head. He had to do something. He had to put an end to this. But how? What could a prisoner locked in a cell for years do? Returning to his cell, Lowell found Theron reading a worn detective novel. "Well?" Theron asked, putting the book down. "Did you find what you wanted?" Lowell nodded silently, then sank down onto his bunk and covered his face with his hands. "The note wasn't lying," he finally said. "It was there, with him." Theron sighed. "I'm sorry, brother. I really am. I have to do something." Lowell raised his head, and Theron recoiled when he saw the look in his eyes. "I can't just sit here and let this go on." "Don't do anything stupid," Tehran warned. "That's exactly what Brooks wants. One wrong move and you'll be in solitary for the rest of your life. Or worse." But Lowell wasn't listening. A plan was forming in his head, a risky, almost impossible plan, but the only one possible in this situation. "I have to talk to her," he said. "Face to face with no witnesses. I have to hear from her why she's doing this." "And how are you going to arrange that?" Theron asked skeptically. "Next Thursday." Lowell lowered his voice, even though they were alone in the cell. "You said she comes in on Mondays and Thursdays. I'll go back to the administrative wing, but I'll need your help." Theron looked at him for a long time, then slowly shook his head. "This is crazy, you know that?" "I know," Lowell nodded, "but I have no choice." Theron sighed and rubbed his face with his hands. "All right, what do you need me to do?" "A diversion," Lowell replied. "Something serious enough to draw the guards away from the administrative wing for at least 10 minutes. 10 minutes, Tehran repeated. "And what do you plan to do once you've got them together?" Lowell turned away toward the wall. "I haven't decided yet, but I have to see her. I have to talk to her. Just once, without all this charade and pretense." Over the next few days, Lowell refined his plan down to the smallest detail. Jalen assigned him to clean the administrative wing again on Thursday. Tehran arranged with several inmates to start a fight in the dining hall at exactly 6:30 p.m., the time Shalia usually came to see Brooks. On Thursday, as Lowell mopped the floors in the administrative wing hallway, his heart was beating so loudly that it seemed to echo off the walls. He glanced at his watch every minute, waiting for the signal. 3 short rings on the prison's internal telephone system, which would mean the fight was about to begin. The clock read 6:25 when he heard the familiar footsteps. Shalia appeared at the end of the hallway, this time in a dark blue suit that looked more businesslike than date-appropriate. Her hair was pulled back in a strict bun, her makeup minimal. She walked quickly, as if in a hurry, and didn't notice Lowell, who was deliberately keeping to the shadows behind the open door of the utility room. Shalia knocked on Brooks's office door, heard a reply, and entered. The door closed, and the corridor was once again silent. 6:28, 6:29. Lowell felt the seconds stretch into eternity. Finally, the phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times. The signal. Almost immediately, a security guard appeared in the hallway, young, alarmed. "Fight in the cafeteria! All available staff report to the scene immediately!" he shouted, as he passed Lowell as if he were invisible. Within a minute, the hallway was empty. The guards rushed to the cafeteria. Prison fights could quickly escalate into a full-scale riot if not stopped immediately. Lowell knew he had no more than 10 minutes. He dropped the mop and hurried to Brooks's office. His heart was pounding in his chest. His mouth was dry. What would he say? What would he do? But first of all, what would he see behind that door? He didn't knock. He carefully turned the handle and quietly opened the door. What he saw in Brooks' office haunted Lowell in his nightmares. Every night he shuddered at the same images. Shalia, in an unambiguous pose next to Brooks. They didn't notice him. He managed to close the door before they discovered him. But those few seconds were enough to destroy his last doubts. A week passed, filled with agonizing thoughts. Lowell hardly slept, ate mechanically, and worked like a robot. He felt like a man whose heart had been ripped out, but for some reason left to live in empty, meaningless agony. "You have to let it go," Theron said one evening, "for your own sanity." "I can't," Lowell replied quietly, staring at the ceiling from his bunk. "I have to know everything. Do you understand? The whole truth. Otherwise, I'll go crazy." "And how are you going to find out the whole truth?" "By peeking through the crack. You've seen enough." Lowell sat up on his bunk and looked at his cellmate. "I want to see the camera footage. Proof." Theron whistled. "Are you out of your mind? That's impossible." "Maybe," Lowell lowered his voice. "Through Jalen. He has access to the security office where the recordings from the last month are kept." "And you think he'd risk his job for your suspicions?" Theron asked skeptically. "No," Lowell shook his head. "But he might risk it for this." He pulled a small bundle from under his mattress, a tiny bag of white powder. "Where did you get this?" Theron asked, shocked. "It doesn't matter," Lowell dismissed. "Jalen likes to have fun on the weekends, he'll agree." And Jalen did agree. For the powder and the promise of additional compensation in the future, he led Lowell to the security checkpoint late at night when only one officer was on duty, his buddy whom Jalen had sent to check out a noise in Corridor B. "You have 10 minutes, Jalen said, sitting Lowell down in front of the monitor. "The recordings for the last month are here. Search by date and time." Lowell quickly found what he was looking for. Monday, 2 weeks ago, 6:30 p.m. The camera in the administrative wing hallway clearly captured Shalia entering Brooks's office. She came out almost 2 hours later, her hair disheveled, adjusting her clothes. Thursday, same week, same story. And again the following Monday. Lowell felt his insides turn to stone. He didn't need to see what was happening in the office. It was enough to notice the transformation, how Shalia would enter the office looking composed and businesslike, and leave looking disheveled, with swollen lips and marks on her neck that she tried to hide with her collar. "Time's up," Jalen whispered, glancing nervously at the door. "One more minute," Lowell asked, scrolling through the records. And then he saw it. Yesterday's entry, Shalia enters the prison not through the main entrance for visitors, but through a service entrance. Brooks himself meets her and leads her inside. This time, they don't go to his office, but to another part of the building. Lowell knew this place. It housed the staff quarters, including a small apartment for the warden, where he sometimes stayed overnight during inspections or emergencies. "That's enough," Jalen turned off the monitor. "Someone's coming." They barely made it out of the room before a guard appeared in the hallway. "What are you doing here?" he asked, frowning at Lowell. "An inmate got lost on his way back from the laundry, sir," Jalen replied quickly. "I'm just taking him back." The guard grunted suspiciously but didn't ask any questions. Back in his cell, Lowell told Taryn everything he had seen. "This isn't just a fling," he said, pacing from corner to corner like a caged animal. This is a relationship. They see each other regularly. She comes to his house, and all this time she's been coming to see me and looking me in the eyes, saying she's waiting for me." "Calm down," Theron said, watching him anxiously. "You're not in any condition to make decisions right now." "What decisions?" Lowell smiled bitterly. "What can I do? I'm locked up here. All I can do is watch the warden fuck my wife while I rot behind bars." "You could talk to her," Theron suggested. "On your next visit, tell her what you know." "Why?" Lowell asked. What difference would it make? But the idea stuck in his mind. Talk to Shalia, hear her side of the story. Maybe there was something behind all this that he didn't understand. Maybe Brooks was blackmailing her, threatening her, or was she doing this of her own free will? The next day, Lowell requested an emergency visit with his wife. Such requests usually took weeks to process, but to his surprise, he was informed 3 days later that his request had been granted. The visit was scheduled for the following Tuesday, the day Brooks usually left for a meeting at the county center. The speed of the approval was suspicious. Theron suggested that it might be a trap. "Brooks knows something," he said. "Maybe Jalen let something slip, or that guard is onto something after all. Be careful." But Lowell was already beyond caution. He craved the truth, craved confrontation, craved an end to this agonizing uncertainty. Over the weekend, Lowell worked out a plan with Theron. He wasn't just going to talk to Shalia. He wanted to make sure she told him the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And to do that, he needed to be alone with her, without guards, without cameras. "Brooks won't be in prison until evening on Tuesday," Theron said. "But if Shalia comes for a visit, we can arrange for you to be alone with her in the visiting room without guards, at least for a few minutes." "How?" Lowell asked. "Remember Jackson? He works in the kitchen. He can slip a laxative into the guard's coffee. Nothing serious, just enough to keep him away for 5 minutes. But that'll be enough." The plan was crazy, but Lowell clung to it like a drowning man clings to a straw. It was his only chance to talk to Shalia without witnesses, to hear the real truth. When Tuesday came, Lowell was ready. He had carefully thought out what he would say to Shalia. How calmly, without accusation, he would ask her about Brooks. How he would give her a chance to explain everything. But in the morning, something unexpected happened. The meeting Brooks was supposed to leave for was canceled. He remained in prison, and the entire plan was in jeopardy. "Cancel everything," Theron advised when he found out. "It's too risky." But Lowell couldn't back down. Not now, when he was so close to the truth. "We're going ahead with the plan," he said firmly. "Only now I need something else." "What?" Theron asked warily. "A gun," Lowell replied simply. "Just in case." Theron looked at him for a long time, then slowly shook his head. "You do realize that's a one-way ticket, don't you?" "I just want to talk to her," Lowell said stubbornly. "But if Brooks gets involved, I have to be ready." Shalia arrived at exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon. She looked tense and pale, not at all like she had during their last meetings. When they sat down at the table in the visiting room, the guard, a young man named Rodriguez, took up his position at the door. "How are you?" Shalia asked, and Lowell detected a note of genuine concern in her voice. "I'm holding on," he replied, studying her face intently. "And you?" "I'm fine," she said, looking away. "Lo, I came to talk about us, about the future." At that moment, security guard Rodriguez suddenly clutched his stomach and grimaced. "Excuse me," he said, looking at them. I'll be right back. Stay right here." As soon as the door closed behind him, Lowell leaned toward Shalia. "I know about you and Brooks," he said without preamble. "I saw the camera footage. I saw you coming to see him in the evenings. I saw you leaving his office." Shalia froze, her eyes wide. What are you talking about?" "Don't lie to me." His voice sounded surprisingly calm. "Not now. Just tell me the truth. Why? Why him?" She stared at him for several long seconds. Then her shoulders slumped, as if all the air had been knocked out of her. "You wouldn't understand," she finally said. "It's complicated." "I have time," Lowell said, knowing they only had a few minutes before the guard returned. Shalia took a deep breath. At first it was just help. Money, a job at his charity, an apartment. I was on the edge, Lo. After you were arrested, I lost almost everything. Waylon offered to help me with no strings attached, but then you fell in love with him? Lowell asked bitterly. No, she shook her head. I don't love him, but he gives me what you can't. Stability, protection, status. And in return, you're sleeping with him, Lowell finished. Shalia didn't deny it. I was going to tell you, she said quietly. Not like this, but I'm filing for divorce, Lo. It'll be better for both of us. At that moment, the door opened, and it wasn't security guard Rodriguez who appeared in the doorway, but Waylon Brooks himself. Mrs. Dayton, he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Officer Rodriguez suddenly felt ill. I decided to check on the situation myself. Lowell felt a flash of rage inside him. Brooks knew. Of course he knew. Maybe Jalen had let something slip. Or maybe the cameras in the security room had caught them watching the tapes. And now Brooks had come to enjoy his humiliation. Shalaya visibly tensed when Brooks appeared. "We're done," she said, standing up. "I've said everything I have to say." "No," Lowell replied, also standing up. "We're not done." Brooks stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "I'm afraid we are, Dayton." Visiting hours were over. His tone was polite, but his eyes betrayed his triumph. He had won. He had taken Lowell's wife, his dignity, his hope. Something clicked in Lowell's head. All this time, he had thought he only wanted the truth. But now, looking at Brooks standing next to Shalaya, he realized what he really wanted. Revenge. With one swift movement, he pulled a utility knife from his sleeve. "Low, no!" Shalaya screamed, but it was too late. Lowell lunged at Brooks. Brooks tried to back away, but Lowell was faster. Months of work in the laundry had turned his body into a sinewy mass of muscle. The first stab hit Brooks in the shoulder. "Help!" Brooks cried, retreating toward the wall. Shalaya rushed between them, trying to stop Lowell. "Stop! You don't understand!" But Lowell couldn't hear her anymore. Blood was pounding in his ears, and his vision was red. He pushed Shalaya away, and she lost her balance and hit her head on the edge of the table. Lowell didn't notice. All his attention was focused on Brooks. "You took everything from me," he hissed, swinging the knife again. "My wife, my life, my future." The second blow struck Brooks in the chest. The third hit him in the stomach. Brooks gasped as he collapsed to the floor. Blood spattered the white wall, Lowell's uniform, and his hands. "Dayton, freeze!" Officer Macon's voice rang out behind him. Lowell turned and saw her in the doorway, her gun pointed at him. Only now did he notice Shalaya lying motionless on the floor. Blood was oozing from the wound on her head, forming a small pool on the gray linoleum. "What have you done?" Macon asked quietly, her voice filled with horror. Lowell dropped the knife and sank to his knees. Reality hit him like a ton of bricks. Shalaya wasn't moving. Brooks was also silent, his eyes open but glassy. "I didn't mean to," he started, but the words stuck in his throat. "Don't move," Macon ordered, keeping her gun pointed at him. "On the floor, hands behind your head." Lowell obediently lay down on the floor, feeling Shalaya's warm blood under his cheek. Screams and footsteps could already be heard in the hallway. The guards were rushing to help. It was all over. His plan for revenge had turned into a nightmare. Not only had he lost his wife, but he had also become a murderer. A double murderer. Now there would be no excuses, no mitigating circumstances, only life imprisonment, or even the death penalty. "Later," he called quietly to Macon. "I didn't want to kill her. I just wanted to talk." "Shut up, Dayton," she replied. But there was no anger in her voice, only deep sadness. "Just shut up." Guards burst into the room, filling it with shouting and movement. They grabbed Lowell, twisted his arms behind his back, and handcuffed him. Someone called for medical assistance, although it was clear that there was nothing they could do. As he was being led away, Lowell took one last look at Shalaya, lying on the floor like a broken doll, her face frozen in a look of surprise. He felt nothing, no grief, no anger, no regret, only emptiness. Officer Macon watched him go with a look of regret and disappointment. She was the only one who believed in his desire to simply give his wife a flower, the only one who saw him as a human being, not a criminal. "I didn't want this," he said as they led him past her. "No one ever does," she replied quietly. "But it always happens." Lowell knew that his life was now completely ruined. There would be no parole, no second chance, only a cold cell, loneliness, and memories of how he had destroyed everything he once loved with his own hands. As he was led down the corridor past the other inmates, who looked at him with a mixture of fear and respect, Lowell caught Taryn's eye. There was no condemnation in his eyes, only understanding and quiet sadness. The cell door slammed shut behind Lowell with a final metallic clang, a sound that would now accompany him for the rest of his life. He sat down on his bunk and covered his face with his hands, but there were no tears. Only emptiness and the realization that from that moment on, his prison would be eternal, not only physically, but also in his soul, in his mind, in his heart. The barred world that had once been a temporary refuge was now his permanent home, a place where he would spend the rest of his days, remembering the moments of passion and rage that had led him to this point of no return.